So when you think of a goal or a purpose and how you may miss that goal or purpose, or how you may attain it. And with that comes a sense of peace on the one hand, guilt on the other. But today, we have no sense of guilt or reason. Reason is in disrepute. What's taking the place of it? Emotion, feeling, sentiment. When you have emotion, you have no guilt.
Travel along, Catholic pilgrims, for 1 year as we learn from Venerable Fulton Sheen, one of the greatest Catholic teachers in modern times. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week for a short reading out of Bishop Sheen's book, Way to Inner Peace. Hello, Catholic pilgrims, and welcome to week 39. This week's topic is called The Sensitiveness of the Innocent. And I think a lot of times when we hear the word innocent, we think of little kids or happy little lambs. Rarely do we ever think of adults. And if we do, we tend to have a negative connotation of the word innocent when it's attached to an adult, like somebody who's been sheltered from the world and they don't know anything and they haven't really lived. That's not what Bishop Sheen is talking about. He's talking more about divine innocence. And that has to do with an awareness of right and wrong, being very keyed into that because you're striving for holiness. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this week. And our 3 key points are feelings, morality, and awareness. Number 39, the sensitiveness of the innocent. Society can live only by standards of right and wrong, but these standards can be lost. In earlier days, men knew why anything was right or wrong. They could give reasons to deter members of society from acting in a certain way. But curiously enough, our age has forgotten the reasons. Right and wrong are largely matters of feeling, and even when something is said to be wrong in itself, such as murder, few seem to be able to say why it is wrong. Morality is thus reduced to something as personal as taste. The mind becomes like the stomach, preferring right to wrong, as it might choose pickles rather than choose cucumbers. It all depends upon your point of view. The ancient Greek historian Thucydides, in speaking of the class struggle to which his society had degenerated, observed, quote, "The meaning of words has no longer the same relation to things, but was changed by them as they thought proper. Reckless daring was held to be loyal courage. Prudent delay was the excuse of a coward. Moderation was the disguise of unmanly weakness. Frantic energy was the true quality of a man. The conspirator who wanted to be safe was a recreant in disguise. The lover of violence was always trusted, and his opponent was suspected." Unquote. The false principles behind this feeling theory of right and wrong are very evident. First, it is held that every experience is for its own sake, whether that experience be sexual, political, social, or economic. The experience cannot be for the sake of anything else, there being nothing else but the self. Second, if we attempt to make any judgment on our experience, it must be done solely on the basis of whether or not the experience is pleasurable to the ego. If it makes me feel good, it is right. Finally, since pleasure or thrill or utility is the sole standard of judgment, it follows the more intense the thrill, the more useful anything is to the self, the better it is. In contrast with this position, compare what might be called the sensitiveness of innocence. The sensitiveness of innocence does not mean ignorance or not having lived. Rather, it is an awareness of what is good and true because one has avoided the false and the evil. The grammarian who knows good style is very sensitive to errors in writing or speaking. The physician is sensitive to disease and any deviation from the norm of health. The philosopher can detect at once a false reasoning process. The director of any orchestra, despite the number of musicians he has before him, can hear the false note from the smallest and least important of the instruments. So in the moral order, when Divine Innocence sat at a table with a traitor, he said, "One of you is about to betray me." Holiness can quickly detect blots. The instinctive reaction of good children to evil is not due to their rational immaturity, but to their maturity in innocence. Such judgments of innocence and purity are totally different from suspicion. Suspicion can often be a reflection of one's own failings. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Matthew 7:1. Often the sins we most loudly condemn in others are those to which we are most secretly attached, or else constitute our greatest weakness. Purity is never suspicious, but looks for some ground for reposing trust. It has a power of apprehension, a penetration, an insight, a talent for psychological discovery that comes not to those who have been infected by wrong. How often the judgment of a child in a family about a visitor is more correct than the judgment of the parents. Innocence made them detect a blemish which the less innocent fail to see. Grown-ups who have surrendered even the quest of goodness are often fearful of the innocence of children, not because they fear to contaminate them, but because they fear condemned unconsciously by the innocent. At the Last Supper, when the Savior said that one was about to betray him, all asked, "Is it I?" No one can be sure of his goodness before innocence. A society that needs healing and regeneration will receive it mostly from the innocent. The pure can look on the impure without contempt. It was Divine Innocence who asked of a sinful woman, "Where are they who accused you?" John 8:10. There was no condemnation in him who was righteousness itself. So there are sympathy and forgiveness and healing in the wings of the innocent. When I was working at the Salvation Army Domestic Violence and Rape Crisis Center, I would do a lot of trainings and speak to a lot of different groups about sexual violence. And something I would frequently say is kids are a great detector of a bad person. And they will often clue you into that, not because they're suspicious, but because their innocence is so pure that they can detect wrongness in somebody. And, so often as adults, we think that we could pick out an abuser really easily, but often kids will be able to do it. And they'll try to tell adults, and the adults won't listen because, again, like Bishop Sheen says, adults have kind of given up on the quest of innocence, and we just don't recognize wrongness anymore because we ourselves have entertained evil where children have not. And so I always encourage people to pay attention to how a child acts around somebody, because very often that's going to give you a good clue as to the state of someone's soul. But I want to go to the very beginning here. I've got 3 main places that I want to talk about. So on page 138, at the top, Bishop Sheen says, "But curiously enough, our age has forgotten the reasons. Right and wrong are largely matters of feeling. And even when something is said to be wrong in itself, such as murder, few seem to be able to say why it is wrong. Morality is thus reduced to something as personal as taste." So, as Christians, for a long time, we have tried to kind of mold and shape the world, especially the Western world, with Christian morality. What we've learned in the Bible, all the teachings of Christ, 10 Commandments, all those types of things. We've tried to shape the world in such a way as to follow the teachings of Christ. Now, we have natural law written within our hearts. We all have a conscience that's placed there by God. It's innate to us as human beings. And so we all just kind of know right from wrong. But as Bishop Sheen says, standards can go out the door and our conscience can be clouded. And so, like I said, for a long time, Christians have been trying to shape the world through moral Christian teachings. And for the most part, we've done a really good job. Now, a lot of people buck against this because, especially as of late, we've been told, oh, you're forcing your morality on us. You can't do that. The thing is, though, is somewhere is the truth about morality. And there's some way to find it. We can use our minds to look at situations and evaluate, use our reason, and come up with an idea about, if we're presented with two different things, whether this one over here is more true or more right than this thing over here. We can do that, but we've been told now in our present day and age that, oh no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're forcing your beliefs on people. And so we've gotten, these platitudes that have been thrown around where we are told, what's moral for you may not be moral for someone else, and my truth, your truth, lived experience, my lived experience trumps anything that you could possibly think. I feel a certain way. We have all these things that people say. And Bishop Sheen is absolutely correct. Right and wrong has been reduced down to mere feelings. How do you feel about it? If you don't like it, well, then it must be something that's wrong. And so you should discard thousands of years of truth and wisdom and do whatever you want. The interesting thing, though, is as Christians, we're told, you need to shut up about your morality. You can't put your morals into laws. That's wrong to press them upon people. And so, for the most part, Christians have been quiet. We just kind of bowed out of the game and just handed the culture over and said, well, I don't want to be called a bigot or old-fashioned or a homophobe or a transphobe or any kind of phobe. I don't want to be called those terrible names. And so I'm just going to live my Christian life hunkered down in my house, and it'll just be completely private, and I won't ever say anything about any moral issue because I don't want to be called a name. The interesting thing is, while we're told that we can't pass any judgment on any action, those who tell us that constantly pass judgment on our actions. They have their own set of morals that they are constantly trying to force upon society. And if you don't go along with it, there are dire consequences. And I think we've all seen in the news the types of things that can happen to people if somebody with this very secular, my truth, your truth worldview can inflict on somebody. And it's dangerous. It's so dangerous. And so what we see here is that they don't like our set of morals, our Christian morals. They like their set of morals or lack thereof. And that's the reality of it all. To say that there is absolutely no morals and nobody can force their morals on anybody else is nonsense. We do it all the time. And, whether you're an atheist or a Christian, you have a set of morals. Now, they could be incorrect. They could be completely right, but you still have a set of morals. And because you believe in them, you're probably going to think that your set of morals are the most right. The problem is we're not allowed to debate it anymore. We're not allowed to have a conversation about, okay, you think X, Y, and Z is correct. I don't think it is. We need to find the truth in this so that we can decide whether or not we're going to allow this or not allow it in our culture, in our society. No, you're not even allowed to do that anymore. But this is what happens when everything boils down to feelings. So then I want to move on further down the page. Bishop Sheen says, the false principles behind this feeling theory of right and wrong are very evident. First, it is held that every experience is for its own sake, whether that experience be sexual, political, or social, or economic. Any experience that you have is just your lived experience, and it's just for its own sake. We can't analyze it in the bigger scope of things. No matter what it is, it's just my experience, and we're told that nobody else gets an opinion on the matter. Nobody else gets to ask a question because this is my experience. You couldn't possibly have anything to add or to question. He goes on to say, second, if we attempt to make any judgment on our experience, it must be done solely on the basis of whether or not the experience is pleasurable to the ego. If it makes me feel good, it is right. And so this is the standard that we live by today is, well, does it make you feel good? Well, then you should go ahead and do it. And we're not allowed to say, well, okay, that might make you feel good, but is it right? And this is exactly the kind of logic, I use in quotes, that comes from a society that has abandoned God. When you don't think about your future life in eternity, when all there is the here and now. And as an atheist person once said to me, well, when you die, it's lights out and you're just turned back into stardust. If that's your worldview, well, then the idea would be to live it up as much as humanly possible in the time that you have. And so pleasure has to be maximized because we don't want any suffering. No suffering allowed here because that's not fun. I only have X amount of years. I have to maximize my pleasure. And so who are you to come and tell me that I can't do these things? The problem with this argument, there's a lot of problems with this argument, but one of the problems is that when you have a standard of, it must be right if it feels good, then you can't condemn rape, pedophilia, robbery. The rapist obviously wants to do what he's doing and he gets power and control and that feels good to him. And so who are you to tell him that he can't do that? If your standard is, well, if it feels good, it must be right. You can't condemn pedophilia because for the pedophile, that's what feels good to him. And so who are you to come along and say that that's not the right way to be, that that's actually grotesque and disgusting and horrific and evil? Well, when you have a standard of, if it feels good, it must be right, you can't condemn those kinds of things. Or robbery. Hey, it feels really good to steal lots of stuff or steal lots of money. And what if the robber really enjoys it and wants to keep doing it? Who are you to say that that's not right? Do you see how that's a really dangerous place to be? Of course it is. We cannot just have a standard of, well, if it feels good, it must be right. That's just lazy thinking and just giving in, like he says, to your ego, to your will. And that's always dangerous. More often than not, it's going to lead us down a path that causes destruction to our souls and probably most likely to a lot of other people. And so here in the end, he talks about innocence. He says, rather, innocence is an awareness of what is good and true because one has avoided the false and the evil. The grammarian who knows good style is very sensitive to errors in writing or speaking. And this is so true. If you are very keyed into something, you're very learned in something, you are able to, as he says, quickly detect blots. I recently edited something for someone, and this person pretty much all day only works with numbers. and doesn't do a lot of just lengthy writing, which is fine. We need all kinds, right? And so, they spend their day working numbers, financial things, money, and those kinds of things. And they had written something that needed to be edited. And so, I teach my kids English, and I write every single day. I've been writing for 13 years now. And so it's something I'm very keyed in on. I mean, when I look back on my writing when I first started out as compared to my writing now, it's so embarrassing. But it was something that was important to me, so I learned to get better and I practiced. And so now I have a heightened sense of errors. And so as I was editing, I could see things that the person who works with numbers all day long couldn't see, and vice versa. If I was presented with a bunch of numbers and financial stuff, I wouldn't be able to tell you if there was anything wrong with it, really. I'm just not keyed into that. He goes on to say, the instinctive reaction of good children to evil is not due to their irrational immaturity, but to their maturity in innocence. My oldest spent the summer working at a Catholic camp in the mountains in California. And she was very much removed from civilization. And she spent all summer up on this mountain working with camp kids, had very little interaction with the civilized world. And she went to mass every day, and she had holy hour every day. And she was constantly talking with people who were very steeped in their faith and had priests around everywhere. She could go to confession pretty much whenever she wanted. She was very, very connected to Christ and very grounded in her faith up there. And she texted me right before she was set to come back. She said, I've been so out of touch with what's going on in the world. I'm a little scared that it's going to be like a bombardment. I was like, yeah, it probably is. And, it was for her when she came back, just to be flooded with news and social media and all that stuff was a little bit of an overload. But while she was out there, she really grew in her Catholic faith and in holiness, I would say, because she was just so steeped in Christ. And I was talking to her about a month after she got back, and, she's back at college now, and she said, Mom, I walk around on campus, and I don't know if it's because I was up in the mountains for so long, and I just, was not around people as much, and I just wasn't seeing all the negativity in the world. She's like, when I walk around on campus and I look at people, I can really see how hurting they are. Like, I'm so aware of it, and I can see how sad and unhappy people are. And I've never been that keyed in. And I think the reason why she was so keyed in is because she had spent so much time away from, all the negative things that just go on in day-to-day life. And she really grew in her innocence, in holiness, I think is what Bishop Sheen is stressing here. She really grew in that. And so she became keenly aware of the state of people's soul. And, she wasn't telling me this because she wanted to judge them or, like Bishop Sheen says, be super suspicious. She was telling me this because she hurt for them. She was so keenly aware of their pain and their suffering that she was sad for them. And she's like, gosh, there's just so many people hurting in the world. And I oftentimes think that we get so desensitized to sorrow and suffering and negativity and all those things that once we are removed from it and we aren't numb to it anymore, when we come back to it, we're like, whoa, this is very heavy. And, I just told her to use that as an opportunity to bring some light into people's days if you can, and to smile at somebody and talk to somebody if you think they might need it. And she started doing that. She started, kind of pressing into conversations that normally would maybe last like a minute or two, but she started, kind of leaning into conversations. And she's like, man, people are just opening up to me left and right. And I think they did because they saw that she was a person who was listening, was aware that something was wrong or that they were hurting in some capacity, or maybe had a little bit more to say after the generic "I'm fine." She was open to seeing what else they had to say and to maybe listening. And so, all of us, when we get that person, we're like, oh, finally, thank you. Here's all the things that are on my mind and that I'm hurting about and hurting over. And I just want to share this with somebody. And so she felt really good that this awareness that she has now, and she feels really good about it, she's able to kind of reach out to people and help them. And so how does this apply to us? Well, I think the biggest thing is that in our homes, in our lives, we have to try to strive for that divine innocence. And that means being very much aware of what we're watching and what we're listening to and what we're reading, and key in on things that are good and wholesome, right and just, and not just let anything into our minds. And I think when you block all of that bad stuff out, and we do need to be aware. We can't live with our heads in the sand. But when you do block a lot of that negativity out and, just very secular ways of thinking, you will find that you grow in that divine innocence and you become more keenly aware of things, and you're more able to detect potentially bad things, and protect your family, protect your kids, protect yourself. It just overall will keep your family mentally and emotionally healthy. And yourself, if you aren't married yet or don't have a family, it will keep you mentally and emotionally healthy. So that is all for this week, Catholic Pilgrims. I will see you back here for week 40. And until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.